I used to think I had it all figured out. I was that student who could wing things last minute and still somehow score well. Confidence was my comfort zone. And comfort, I told myself that that was self care. Have you ever lied to yourself so convincingly that you actually believed it? I have. So, back in my 10th grade, when my math pre boards came around, I didn't study. I told myself I needed rest. Math being my least favorite subject, I didn't want to burn out. I convinced myself that this was self care. And then I walked into the exam hall, sat there for 2.5 hours, and wrote absolutely nothing. That moment hit hard because for the first time, I didn't just underperform, I completely froze. And worse, I realized I had gaslit myself into failure. Somewhere between the first unsolved question to breaking down during the exam and later in front of my dad, I realized how easy it is to lie to yourselves and how easily we confuse laziness for self care and sometimes the opposite as well. But let's be honest, haven't we all done it? Called a 4-hour nap healing or told ourselves that binge watching 3 seasons of a show was resting our minds? That blurry line between caring for yourself and avoiding everything had become my new obsession. Because this wasn't just about an exam. This was about a pattern of mistaking laziness for burnout and burnout for laziness. So I promised myself that this wouldn't happen again. Because I couldn't risk feeling like this during my boards. So I did what most of us would do. I overcorrected. I started waking up at 3:30 in the morning every single day, solving math questions before the sun even came up. I joined one tuition, then two, then three. I never even liked math, but I told myself I had to, because if I didn't push myself, I would fail. No breaks, no rest, no room to breathe, just pressure. Because I pushed myself hard because that's what discipline looked like. I convinced myself that if I didn't hustle every second, I would end up failing and I would end up in tears again. And then, 35 days later, the news came in that the boards were cancelled. I remember staring at the wall, numb. All that effort, all that guilt, and for what? I haven't touched math ever since. It's been 5 years. I didn't grow. I burnt out. In fact, I burnt the bridge between me and the subject altogether. Now, it's almost funny. I've lived both extremes. One was self care, and the other was rigid discipline, but neither felt right. I wasn't balanced. I was either too relaxed to care or too burnt out to stop. And maybe that is the problem. We're so quick to label rest as laziness and effort as success that we often forget that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. But let's be honest, haven't we all done it? I started wondering how many of us are stuck in the same confusion. We cancel plans because we're honoring our boundaries, but truthfully, we're just avoiding people. We sleep in and call it a mental health day. We're just avoiding our responsibilities. And then there are days where we actually need rest, but we don't take it. We punish ourselves for being lazy because we feel guilty. It's a mental tug of war between guilt and exhaustion. And you know what makes it worse? Other people's voices. You're laying in bed at 3 p.m. and your parents walk in like, oh, so this is how you label productivity as? They think it's laziness, but they don't realize that we don't always know the difference either. I thought I was the only one that was confused. And I started wondering how many of us are stuck in the same confusion. And turns out it's not just in our heads, research backs this up. In a study I worked with my peers, we looked at how adverse childhood experiences affect the way people looked at themselves. Out of 414 participants, 52% of them had at least one childhood experience like emotional neglect or high pressure. People with higher adversity scores were more likely to blame themselves for resting, for failing, and even for times when it wasn't even their fault. And surprisingly, their self-concept, the way they looked at themselves overall, didn't change as much. Which makes sense, right? You could still believe that you're capable while questioning whether you've done enough or not. Other research says that when you're emotionally drained, your brain chooses to do what feels the easiest in the moment. We scroll, we snooze, we escape, and we call it care, but often it's just survival. Real self care isn't always soft. Sometimes it's doing the uncomfortable thing. Getting up, drinking water, talking to a friend, doing that one thing that you don't really feel like doing. For me, it's this public speaking, my biggest fear. Because this is what actual growth looks like. And discipline, it's not punishment, it's self respect in action. I've lived both extremes. I've pushed too far and called it discipline. I've rested too much and called it healing, but none of it was right. Now I try to live in the middle. The part that's quiet, the part that's soft, real, but not perfect. And if there's one thing I want to leave you with today, it's this. If you don't define what self care looks like to you, the world is going to do it for you. And it's going to definitely get it wrong. So the next time you're laying in a bed, debating between Netflix or showing up, ask yourself, is this comfort or is it avoidance? Is it discipline or is it fear? Because our lives aren't shaped in those extremes. They're shaped in those tiny moments where you choose to become who you want to be and who you're meant to be when no one else is watching. And maybe that is where the real self care begins. Thank you.